Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate you joining up with me today. I finally got this minion build hitting for over 1,000,000 on these lucky hit procs. It's going to be an awesome build, I think, for the end of this season and prepping for what you can expect in Season 1, and it allows minions to be viable in the end game. Let's dive right in. So I have no core or basic ability on the skill bar at all, and instead I'm heavily focused in buffing my minions and their damage and their chance at lucky hit. I pull all the enemies in with corpse tendrils, and I'm constantly using my corpse explosion for my best chance of a lucky hit proc. And since I have lucky hit on nearly all of my equipment, it procs all of the time. And when it does proc, my minions can hit upwards of 135k plus a piece, equaling to well over 1,000,000 damage, being that I have 12 minions. Oh yeah, 168. One of them just at 168. Now, I know I'm going to hear in the comments, but my bone spirit's hitting for 15 million at level 70. And listen, I've been there. I've used those builds. I've tested them. I know they're strong. And it just doesn't feel like a necromancer to me. So I wanted to make sure I can make something like this viable. And I feel like I can only take this build up higher and higher. It feels great playing this class. When it comes to the basic and core abilities, we're actually not going to use a single one of them. So we're just trying to get through the requirement to get down to the later tiers of skills. So I put points into decompose. It doesn't matter what you do. You're not going to use it either way. Going through the core, instead of any of these abilities, you're instead going to pick Hewed Flesh Up, which is just a very important aspect of the build. You can't get around this. You need to use this. It just makes it so every single instance of damage that you do has a chance, a 12% chance it drops a corpse. I'm going to choose to use Corpse Explosion here. I use Corpse Explosion mainly only for the chance that it has a lucky hit chance on it. It's my source of using lucky hit. One of the build changes that I made initially was I was using Bone Spear instead of Corpse Explosion, because Bone Spear technically has the highest lucky hit chance that you can get. I have it at 72, but if I put a certain focus on, I can actually get this up to almost 85% lucky hit chance. But what I found is just managing the essence of using Bone Spear at the same time and using different aspects to ensure that I could use more Bone Spears to proc lucky hit was not worth it in comparison to having unlimited Corpse Explosions at a slightly less lucky hit percentage. Using more of these lucky hits, or using more of this skill, just procced more lucky hits, because ultimately I could use more of them rather than having a higher chance of using less with Bone Spear. So moral of the story, through my testing, I found that Corpse Explosion was the better way to proc lucky hit, because I could use it almost indefinitely 24/7. So I'm using one node here just to get to the second dial, because it's just increasing my damage whenever I consume a corpse. Buffing up my warriors. I have a point in the thorns just because I wanted thorns on my minions, despite if I have any on my equipment, because thorns can actually proc certain lucky hits, but that's getting way into the weeds. I put one there. If you have thorns on your equipment, you don't necessarily need that skill point there, and you can put it down into these passives that buff up damage. Going down here into your curse skills, you want to ensure that you have Decrepify. Decrepify is a massive portion of this build because it makes it so you have indefinite cooldowns, reduction, and you have a chance at stunning enemies for 2 seconds. This is a super strong ability for the build, and I have this on my left click because I'm using it before I engage 24/7. It's the first thing I do, and every time I see a new minion, I guarantee I put Decrepify on them. Like I said, it has a chance to stun the enemies for 2 seconds, which is super important for the build because we're doing more damage to stunned enemies. And also it has a 15% chance to reduce your active cooldown. So you'll see my cooldown just shooting down to have, I have indefinite stuns up and corpse tendrils up and my ultimate up, but we'll talk about that shortly. Outside of that, I'm going to put points into Skeletal Mage Mastery, which is going to increase the damage and life of my skeletal mages. Very strong and inherent. It's just very obvious what that use is for. 9% increased damage to cursed enemies because they're always going to be cursed. Take, close enemies deal 6% less damage to you and you deal 9% to them. And then I have some damage to distant as well. A lot of the time I'm going to be up in their face with this build, so I prioritize the close enemies. Then I want to use Corpse Tendrils. I have 1 point into Corpse Tendrils. The whole point of this is to just gather all the minions into one location so that when my lucky hits proc, it hits everyone at the same spot. Very strong for this build. Things I have on this is that it slows enemies before pulling them, and then it makes them vulnerable after activating. Just 20% more damage from vulnerable. Why not, right? A very strong part of the build as well, Necrotic Carapace. Whenever a corpse is formed, And we're going to be using Reapers for our minions, so there's corpse forming all the time. And Hued Flesh, there'll be corpses all over the map, just endless corpses. Every time you blow up a corpse explosion, there's always another one at their feet. So we're going to hit all of these nodes. These are all impactful, making it so whenever you overuse a summon, you're going to summon a skeletal priest that's going to heal your minions for 60% of their maximum life every 5 seconds. We have a lot of minion health on this build. 16% life on a minion that has a ton of health is super important. Every 5 seconds, it makes them not go down. Minions cannot lose more than 30% of their life per instance. The only time that they'll get around that is if you have your minions on top of a poison cloud or something like that, or fire. It kind of gets annoying and tough, but you just keep healing in those situations. After you've been healthy for 4 seconds, your minion gain 12% increased attack speed, and you're going to be healthy a ton of the time because this whole build relies on barrier and fortify. And then 30% increased damage when you're close to them. Go stand near your mages in the background and they'll do a ton of damage. I choose the ultimate of Bone Storm. I initially loved Army of the Dead because it made it so it rose all my minions and it gave them attack speed, and there was an aspect that it gives them 90% reduced damage while giving them 90% increased attack speed. Problem is, once you get to these high 50 tier endgame dungeons, nightmares, you need more survivability. You get 15% increased damage reduction, and also there's an aspect that makes it so every time Bone Storm ticks a single enemy, it gives you 4% barrier. So when you run into a crowd of enemies, you're constantly at maximum barrier. So it's just a big plus. Definitely put that in there. And then Kalen's Edict just recently got buffed. Now, when you haven't been hit for 2 seconds, your minions gain up to 30% increased attack speed. It says 15, but it's doubled when you have at least 7 minions, and in this build, you have 12. At least. So it's just 30% increased attack speed all the time for your minions is just a massive W. And it being able to come back every 2 seconds you don't get hit is much better than 3. I know, you know, a second reduction may not seem like much, but that's a 33% buff. With that, let's show quickly our aspects, and then we'll go into the Paragon. Going into the aspects of what I have on this build, increase the number of skeletal mages by 2 here. Just, you're going to want that. I like this on the chest piece, but this is the only aspect I think you could potentially switch up because there's so much stun on the build inherently. You don't necessarily need this, but it makes it so whenever there's an enemy that's crowd control and you inflict lucky hit, there's a 50% chance that crowd control spreads. So everyone is 24/7 going to be stunned. The reason I might see that you could change this up for something else is that Corpse Central stuns everyone anyway, and it being always off cooldown with Decrepify, you don't necessarily need this. So I might swap this out, but it's something I have for now, and I find it effective. I think it's really good to have Howl from below because me using Corpse Explosion, having the Howl from below, making sure my minions are always, or the Corpse Explosions are always hitting a target and guaranteeing a lucky hit proc chance, or at least an effort at a lucky hit, is super important. If you don't have Howl from below, it might be worth using Bone Spear and trying to manage that essence. It's going to be kind of a pain in the ass, but this is what I was talking about. Each time Bone Storm damaged an enemy, you gain a barrier equal to 4% of your base life for 10 seconds. When you run into a crowd of minions, this is just hitting everyone. You're going to be at 100% barrier 24/7, making you invulnerable. On my boots, I have increased the Skeletal Warriors. I like to use a wand on this build because it has 15% increased lucky hit chance inherently on the weapon. So you can choose to use the Corpse Explosion that does Shadow Miasma. On the build, I run not necessarily Shadow Miasma. I do it so on my ability here, you'll see my Corpse Explosion is actually on... it does more damage to enemies that are slow, stunned, or vulnerable. You know, the Shadow Miasma is nice, and honestly, it's effective for this specific weapon, or because I have a weapon that we do more, you know, 16% increase more damage to enemies that are affected by it. So it synergizes with the build, making sure my minions do more. But in the end of the day, either of those are viable and fine picks, because all you're really using Corpse Explosion for, like I said, is lucky hit procs. But on, you know, additionally to that, 30% increased damage to slowed enemies, and it has a lucky hit chance to execute, which is anything with lucky hit on this build that we're focusing, getting as much lucky hit percentage as possible, is going to be strong. The imprinted aspect I have is your skeletons gain 30% increased damage while alive after 10 seconds. So that's a ton of increase, and since these minions are rarely going down, super effective. Each time for the necklace here, each time one of your minions damages an enemy, they gain attack speed. I have it up to 54% right now. I tested out some other stuff here. I threw skeletal mages on here for a while to get an additional mage, but I found that the attack speed was just too much to pass up on. It's too good for corpse generation. It's too good for your mages in the backline doing a ton of damage. I think that attack speed is the way to go for the necklace, but you can mess around and put mages or warriors up there if you'd like. This is a massive guaranteed section of the build. All of our damage on this build that can hit up to 1 million, it revolves around Ringham and Delm. Because right now it shows that when you have a lucky hit proc, there's a 10% chance of that when that lucky hit procs, that all of your minions will explode for 16,470 damage. But it doesn't just do 16,470. That's the base number before of all the damage increases that you have in your build. My minions have, at the moment, with the way I've had this built, they're hitting anywhere from every time this procs from 60-ish K to 140K. So there are times where on a boss, for example, you're the man. So I have moments on bosses where all of them, my minions are hitting upwards of 130K a piece when this lucky hit procs multiple times in a row. So that's over 1 million multiple times consecutively. And it deletes everything. It's really good. The only downside is when suppression comes into play, I try to avoid suppression as much as possible. That's a major counter to this build because your mages can't throw any damage through there, and thus their lucky hit procs don't count through the suppression circle. So that sucks. What I try to do a lot of the time is corpse tendrils my minions inside the suppression circle, and that's the only way I can really get that to work. But I can force that to happen with that. Increased damage when standing still. I stand still on this build similar to what I did before. Up to 30% increased damage in general as I stay stationary. You'll see my attack power. It gets up to 15K when all this stuff stacks. Last but not least, I throw a shield on this build for survivability in the end game. You need it. Every time I hit an elite, I get a barrier. It has 6% lucky hit chance. Like I said, on these builds, I'm looking for lucky hit on every item. I got it on my shield, got it on my rings, both my rings. My necklace doesn't have it yet, but I have it on my weapon. So my total lucky hit on this build, 43% increase. Another thing to note is there's actually a boss at the bottom left of this map here. She's always there. It'll actually be right here. So you look, you'll see Gekul or whatever, Gekul. It's in the bottom left of this map, right in this location, or actually, sorry, right here, I believe. There'll be a woman preaching to a bunch of people on the ground. If you talk to her enough, she'll fight you, and you can keep fighting her over and over and over again. And she drops a specific focus, which is right here, that has a ton of lucky hit chance on it, okay? A ton. I have this specific one that has 20% inherently on itself. So I equip this, and I can get my lucky hit to 64 on this. On my bone spear, I had it at 85%. It was lucky hitting every throw. But like I said, I just find more impact on Corpse Explosion. The only reason I don't have this on is because as you're getting to tier 60s, this shield is just more important, and you can't put defensive aspects on a focus. You can only put offensive aspects. But if you manage to find survivability on the rest of your build, and you're putting, for example, barrier on my chest piece, I could see a way where I put this focus on here, putting barrier on my chest piece instead, and just having even more CC ability. I think this has a lot of utility. This could be pretty strong. Like I said, still kind of working on this build, right? So very open to suggestions and stuff in the comments. Make sure you put them in the comments below. On the first board, I highly suggest you put in a increased bonus to rare nodes. The reason being, for necromancers, there's a node here that gives you straight up damage. You increasing this a ton makes your straight up damage massive. This is already almost at a 40% total increase in damage, plus another 19.5 from the bonus. I just highly suggest you do this. It also increases your armor and intelligence and your additional armor on the right side. So I would start with that glyph, rare bonus, no matter what, okay? Moving forward, I use the node that's gonna lead you to Cult Leader. Since I'm using all minions here, it's just a 45% increased damage because I'm using all minions. I go up, I hit these nodes. This is just damage, skeletal mage damage, damage reduction for minions, minion damage in general, minion damage again with the minion attack speed. All this stuff is just really impactful. Skeletal mage damage here, and then obviously the legendary node. For my glyph at this point, I am putting skeletal mage damage in here, and I mean, with the Ring of Mendel, my skeletal mages are hitting so high right now with this. I have them at 130 and increases based on your intelligence, and it gives them increased resistances across the board. On to the next set, I went into Flesh Eater because I'm consuming corpses all the time. So every 5 corpses increase another 40% increase in total damage, just stacking more and more effects. And that's where like I said, I can see my stats getting up to 15, 16K. Some of the nodes here that I like to select, you know, you want to get, I'm still working on dexterity, but damage to elites and stuff is important. But the whole point of this is to get to this glyph, which is increased damage to crowd controlled enemies, which since this build is constantly CCing enemies, very strong. I still am working towards that. Another thing I really want to hit, which I'm one node off here, is that it's just another lucky hit proc. So once I get the additional willpower, which I'll easily be able to acquire, I'll have an additional 20% chance to execute non-elites. So since I'm proccing lucky hit all the time, not all these are going to be deleted instantaneously because it's just going to proc all the time. Because I already have a fair amount from some of my skills, execution of non-elites. This is just going to make it even stronger. An additional 20% chance at the lucky hit proccing non-elite. If you like this kind of content, going to my Twitch and hitting the follow button there is the best way to support me. Subscribing down here below, sharing, liking the video, all that stuff is unbelievably appreciated. Thank you guys so much for being here, and I'll see you soon.